Hello and welcome to Crossing Channels. I'm Richard Westcott. What is the value of speaking other languages? That's the subject of the latest in our podcast collaboration between Cambridge University's Bennett Institute for Public Policy and the Institute for Advanced Study in Toulouse. As ever, we're going to use the interdisciplinary strengths of both institutions to explore a complex issue: how language shapes identity and social belonging, how it influences the way we think and reason, and why multilingualism matters for education, policy, society, and the economy. To explore these issues today, we have Wendy Ayres-Bennett from Cambridge University and the Bennett Institute. Wendy, start us off. What does your research focus on?
Well, hello. My research interests include historical linguistics, the history of linguistic thought, language standardisation, multilingualism, and language policy and planning. And I'm currently writing a book on language policy in the UK, which is funded by the Leverhulme Trust.
And joining us from the IAST, we have Benjamin Pitt. Benjamin, remind us of your main research interests.
I'm a cognitive scientist, and cognitive science is basically trying to understand the structure of the mind. And my particular research focuses on concepts of space and time and numbers, basic features of our experience, and how those concepts vary across cultures and across languages.
In an increasingly globalized world, language plays a central role in how we connect, learn, and belong. Yet in some countries, the number of students studying foreign languages is in long-term decline. For example, in the UK, entries for modern foreign language GCSEs have fallen by over a third since 2004. And in the US, college enrollments in language courses have dropped by more than 16% between 2016 and 2021. But beyond the classroom, speaking multiple languages has been linked to better cognitive flexibility, delayed onset of dementia, stronger social cohesion, and even increased earnings. So, why does language learning still struggle to gain policy traction? And what are we missing when we treat multilingualism as an optional? So, Wendy, we'll start with you. Your work long focused on language policy and multilingualism, and you led the major AHRC-funded project, which was Multilingualism, Empowering Individuals, Transforming Societies. Can you walk us through why multilingualism matters, not just for the individuals, but for society as well?
Yes, thank you. Well, I guess the first thing to point out is that more than half of the world can and does speak more than one language, so monolinguals are in the minority. And what we tried to do in this project was to look at multilingualism holistically. You can be multilingual in all sorts of ways. You might be multilingual like I am, in the sense that I learnt languages at school. I grew up monolingual, but I learnt languages, started at 11 learning French in school, as many people in the UK of my generation did. Then we've got speakers of what we call home, heritage and community languages. Languages of migration, they could be long-standing or very recent. So in the UK, Polish, Cantonese, but also Ukrainian. And just to note that 1 in 5 kids starting school in the UK has a home language other than English, 1 in 5. So it's a minority, but it's quite a big minority. And then you've got all the indigenous languages of the UK, so Welsh, Irish, Gaelic in Scotland, Ulster Scots, Scots, Cornish, and also British Sign Language, BSL. Benefits the individual, well, there are the traditional ones that we know about: opportunities for travel, languages opening doors, the pleasure of discovering new languages, new people, new places. But also this thing about stepping outside your own language and culture. I think Benjamin will talk about that, and seeing things through in different ways. But we've got new benefits emerging, as you hinted in your question to me. And again, Benjamin might develop some of these things. We know that learning a language helps with things like oracy and literacy in your own language. It washes back to your first language. And then there's the benefits of health and well-being. We think about language being multilingual as helping what we might think of it as mental agility, the ability to switch between tasks. And there's been emerging evidence, well, really over the last 20 years now, about these cognitive benefits of multilingualism, suggesting that speaking another language might help the delay of onset of dementia or help recovery from stroke. So that's kind of the individual part of it. And I'll just say something really briefly about the societal things. Defence and security. We're in a current geopolitical situation where we need to be able to speak other languages. We need speakers of Mandarin. We need speakers of Russian. And that works through things like soft power and diplomacy as well, social cohesion, conflict resolution. And I'll perhaps just give one example, if I can, of that, which is the Northern Ireland example, where language choice can be seen as threatening or divisive or confrontational. Why is that? Because the Irish language has traditionally been associated with the Catholic, nationalist and Republican community. But research has shown that some of this was done as part of my team's work, that learning of Irish by Protestant, loyalist, unionist community can be a vehicle for reconciliation and empathy for the other. And we had researchers at Queen's University Belfast who, as part of this project, interviewed learners of Irish in the East Belfast mission. And that's significant because that would be in an area of Belfast which would typically be fairly hostile to the Irish language. And for the interviewees, learning Irish was seen as a way not just of engaging with the shared heritage of the Irish language. So Irish is around you in place names and things like that. There's this shared heritage. But they also talked about how it widened their social networks and connected them with people with different beliefs in ways that they probably previously wouldn't have even conceived of being possible. So using Irish language as a tool in reconciliation and peace building.
I want to quickly explore something you said about social cohesion and trust and immigration as well. It's obviously a global issue, immigration. Just quickly, what role do you think learning languages can play in bringing communities together more? I'm not talking necessarily about everyone learning, say, French, but perhaps it's learning the language of the migrants coming over, for example. Could it play a big role there?
I think we have to be very careful because obviously there is a need for everybody to learn English in terms of integration, access to jobs, access to healthcare and all those sorts of things. But it's also very important to respect people's language and culture. Put yourself in somebody's position, or you're going to live somewhere else in the world, and they said to you, learn that language, and if possible, don't speak your own language and think about your own culture anymore. It's an impossible situation. And an interesting case would be, again, researchers have been looking at what happens with Ukrainian refugees when they arrive in the UK. And sometimes they're given a Russian interpreter. Why are they given a Russian interpreter? Because most Ukrainians, or many Ukrainians, are bilingual. They speak Ukrainian and Russian. But the research has shown that arriving in the UK and being given a Russian interpreter is really, really traumatic. And it just increases their pain and their sense of alienation. So we have to be really careful. Yes, I think that we can do more, and we perhaps should do more to try and encourage and promote the home heritage community languages, and also build them into our language learning classrooms. Sometimes having speakers of other languages in the learning classroom, language learning classroom learning French, for example, is seen as a bit of a disadvantage. They ought to be seen as an advantage. What's the word for today in your language? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, why it's different, and let's think about that. And they have that kind of meta-linguistic knowledge. They've already acquiring more than one language, which can be really useful for other language learners. So I think we can use it for social cohesion in the language classroom as well.
Benjamin, some of your work explores how different languages encode fundamental concepts like time and space. I mean, you talked about it in your introduction. So I'm intrigued. What can this tell us about how language shapes how people think and reason about the world? Because my layman's view would just be that broadly most languages do a very similar job.
Yeah. I think that there's this sort of general idea that languages may be sort of superficially different, but they're all basically doing the same job, as you say. You might especially think that that's true for, really basic things like how we think about time or numbers or the space around us, right? It turns out, though, as my research and many other people's research has shown, that even those very basic cognitive domains, the way that we think about these very basic aspects of our experience, varies as a function of your language and culture. Our language, whether we sort of are aware of it or not, our language is full of metaphors. So we say things, for example, about high pitches and low pitches, right? When we're talking about the sounds of music. Those sounds aren't physically high or physically low. It's sort of a metaphor that we use, a metaphor using height, right? That seems perfectly natural to an English speaker, but it turns out that that sort of thing is not universal, that there are other metaphors for musical pitch that you find in other languages. So some other languages, for example, instead of referring to sounds as high or low, refer to them as thick or thin, right? And if you say high or low, it doesn't make sense to them. It's not like they have both. They have a different metaphor in their language. But it turns out that difference actually causes a difference in the way that people think about musical pitch, even when they're not speaking. So you can give in these very clever experiments done by some collaborators of mine, they give people these sort of psychophysical tasks, which is just to say sort of simple tasks where they don't have to talk, they just have to sort of reproduce the pitch of a sound. And it turns out that the way that you reproduce a sound, a tone, depends on the language that you speak. That if you speak a language like English, where we talk about pitches as high or low, if you play a sound and sort of cue them visually to a high point on the screen, they'll reproduce the sound that they've just heard a little bit high in pitch. That's sort of one of these sort of clever ways that psychologists have of getting at not just how people talk differently about the same things, but how those differences in language actually have cognitive consequences that go much deeper than language.
So it can make you feel differently about the world, like different concepts, do you mean? Does it change the way you conceive certain things?
Yeah, it changes the way that you conceive certain things. And what I find surprising is that it can change the way that you conceive even really basic things, right? So things like pitch, like why should that vary? It turns out that it does. There are similar effects for time. So we talk in English, for example, about events being long or short, right? A long vacation, for example. That's another metaphor where we're sort of using the idea of spatial length, like a string is long, to refer to time, like a vacation is long. That also is not universal. And it for example, in Greek, they talk, instead of saying a long night, they say a big night. A big night in Greek doesn't mean that you went out and partied. It means it was long. And those differences in language have the same sorts of consequences on how people conceptualize time in their minds.
So, Wendy, you talked about the benefits to a person, but also to the economy and to society of learning languages. What's your experience of current governments and their acceptance of that argument, that actually pushing languages in schools, and I think we've all seen that languages are disappearing from a lot of schools, actually has economic benefits as well, which always makes governments wake up, doesn't it, and listen when they think that it's good for the economy. Are they listening? Are they hearing that?
I think they're beginning to. Perhaps it's useful just to explain a little bit about what that work entailed. This was a 2022 report that I did with RAND Europe, trying to pin down precisely the economic benefits. I'm going to give you the highlights of some of the findings. It's quite a technical and complicated report, but what we found was that sharing spoken languages can reduce trade barriers. So, contrary to what you might think, English, though it's really important as a lingua franca in business, is not the sole driver between existing trade flows across different business sectors. And what we did was we broke down these trade flows into different sectors and found that as an increase in bilateral trade in mining and energy and services, when a proportion of the population of two countries are able to communicate through a shared spoken language, all else being equal. So specifically, just a 1% increase in the probability that two people from two countries meet at random and are able to communicate with each other increases trade in mining and energy by 2.4% and trade in services by 0.6%. Now, 0.6% doesn't sound very much, but 0.6 of a lot of trade, which is trade in services in the UK, is really quite significant. So the corollary of that is that UK exports are predicted to increase if there's an increase in the number of languages shared with trading partners. And we looked at 4 languages, 2 which are well established in the school system, French and Spanish, one which is relatively minor still, Mandarin, and another which doesn't really have much of a place in mainstream education, which was Arabic. And what we showed was that a full eradication of language barriers with Arabic, Chinese, French and Spanish speaking countries could, we estimated, increase UK exports annually by about 19 billion. So then we looked at, well, how can we get these financial benefits to the UK? So what we looked at is, supposing we increase the number of kids in school, age 11 to 16, learning Mandarin, doing an intensive Mandarin course, so that they could use that language in business later in life. And what we found was that could increase the UK's GDP cumulatively over a 30-year period by between 11.5 and 12.3 billion. And that's about 0.5 of the UK's GDP in 2019. So if you had more increase, you get more benefits. Similar sorts of benefits for Arabic, slightly less for French and Spanish, around the 9.5 billion. Okay, great. So, but what you have to offset against this is the cost of achieving those benefits. And what we found was that even under conservative assumptions, every pound you spend today brings back £2. So there is an economic benefit. And when I'm talking about that, that is just purely the numbers. That's just the economic benefits. That leaves out all the educational benefits, that leaves out the personal, social benefits, community benefits that we've already talked about. So that looks to be a strong case to make to government for the benefits of language learning. And that's one of the cases that we're strongly trying to make.
I want to talk to you both now about the dominance of English. We're obviously all speaking in English now, for example. And Wendy, I want to ask you in a second about what we lose if the world becomes dominated by English, because I guess all the internet and popular music and Hollywood, and it's all dominated by English. But first of all, Benjamin, this hadn't occurred to me, but of course it's obvious. Psychological studies are disproportionately conducted in English-speaking populations. What does that actually mean for your field? What does that mean for the results that you get? You were just talking about different languages making people conceive things in different ways. How does doing so much in English sort of skew the results effectively?
Yeah, it's an important question. There's been a pervasive sampling bias, basically, in psychological sciences and other behavioral sciences as well. It's not representative, and it's not good for science, right? There are 7,000 languages roughly in the world, and English is just one of them. It's not a particularly representative one of them, right? There are, as Wendy was mentioning, there are enormous varieties of languages. There are tonal languages, signed languages. Many languages are written, many languages are not written. There are many consequences, right? So what we're, I think, generally trying to do in behavioral sciences is to, do experiments, collect data, and make inferences about people in general, right? And so you have to think carefully about what populations you're sampling. And so if we sample persistently from a single population, then the conclusions that we draw are likely to be faulty or simply not generalizable. They may be true of English speakers, But what's true of English speakers may not be true of other populations, and that's not just hypothetical. Now there's a concerted effort to sort of diversify the set of populations, the set of languages that linguists and cognitive scientists study. And when you do that, what you find is that many of the findings that you sort of took for granted and assumed would generalize across all human groups turn out not to be as generalizable as you thought. And some things that you took as given turn out to need revisiting. That's how science advances, right? Is sort of challenging these sorts of assumptions. What we thought was true turns out to be more complicated or more nuanced, and by sort of sampling, the wide variety of languages that we have, we can get a fuller picture of human nature ultimately.
Yeah, I was just going to say this overemphasis on English, which you started talking about, I think also affects AI and tools like Google Translate. Large language models are getting more sophisticated, but they don't yet have the deep intercultural understanding which comes with really knowing a language well. The pragmatics, the extra things that Benjamin's been talking about, the differences between languages. And while AI works relatively well for the world's major languages, my understanding is it's very poor or even non-existent for smaller languages and dialects, because the language models have to be trained on languages, right? And you need to have data. So if you have a language for which there's not much data, then you can't train the models. And so there's a real heavy emphasis on the big languages at the moment, and that is a problem.
And you talked earlier, Wendy, about some of the barriers to getting languages higher up the political agenda. Just briefly, what are those barriers? You've made the economic case, you've made the social cohesion case.
Yeah, so I think in government, we don't have many of the usual channels to get research-informed evidence into government. We don't have a chief government linguist, right? We don't have the network of chief scientific advisors and the numerous scientific advisory councils and committees. Now, in recent years, there's been quite a lot of effort to try and facilitate collaboration. There's been the establishment of something called the Cross-Government Languages Group, and it has various subcommittees, including one on academic engagement, on which I sit. But we don't yet have support at ministerial level. We don't have enough MPs banging the drum for languages. So the DFE, by which I mean the Department for Education, really needs the support to come from other departments as well. A good case recently was there is this Mandarin Excellence Programme, a scheme to teach Mandarin to kids in state schools and some independent schools as well. And the funding of that was under threat because of the current financial situation. So the FCDO came in, that's our Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK. Very helpfully, the FCDO came in and said, no, we need, in this current situation, the UK needs Mandarin speakers, and that's what we need. We need other departments coming in and helping to make the case for languages so that we get more investment in languages and languages education.
Now, on the pod, we always like to future gaze because obviously it's so easy to predict the future, isn't it, as we all know. The first thing I thought when we said we were going to do a podcast in this area was, like we can't be far, and this is for both of you, so we'll start with Benjamin. We can't be far off technology, I'm assuming, that translates any language simultaneously. I'm already... the other day I looked at my phone and someone had left a voice message and I get a little transcript of the voice message. And that's just suddenly happened. I didn't even know my phone could do that. And it might not be every language, it would be lots of languages. So assuming that in the end you have these Babel fish instantaneous translators in your head, and we're not learning new languages, what do you think the world loses by not learning so many languages if technology goes down this path? Benjamin.
Yeah. It's an exciting and terrifying thought. I love the idea of being able to communicate with anyone, easily. I live in France. My wife is Spanish. I'm sort of dealing with the difficulties of, of for second and third languages on a daily basis. That's the exciting part, is sort of making that easier. The terrifying part is, I think that what we would lose would be an opportunity to see the world in different ways and sort of understand each other's cultural experience in a more profound way. That, what you get by speaking another language is not just the ability to communicate with new people, which is valuable in and of itself, but also the ability to sort of take their perspective and understand their culture in a way that I think is impossible or nearly impossible without really sharing the language. So translation, I'm sure, would be very, very convenient and may have all sorts of practical benefits, but I guess what we would lose is some sort of cultural understanding of each other on like a deeper level.
Benjamin, you've just become a new dad, and congratulations on that. What will you be doing to make sure that your child doesn't lose things? You say you've got a Spanish wife. Are you going to bring that child up multilingual? What are your plans?
Yes. Well, we hope to. So the plan is for my wife to speak to him in Spanish, and for me to speak in English. And that dynamic already is sort of a slightly new one for us. He'll have some French. We live in France, so he'll have some French in at least in his early life. His grandparents speak Basque, a completely different language. So it's a little bit of a mess, but I'm hoping, I think we're hoping that he'll grow up multilingual, at least English, Spanish, if not more.
Well, we were all saying, weren't we? Children just pick up languages seemingly so easily compared to adults.
I know. Well, it's one of the sort of the gifts, I think, that an intercultural couple can give to their children, because for them it seems seemingly effortless.
Wendy, what are your views on where technology might take us and what we might lose? You can see the gains of being able to talk to people instantly, but what would we lose if we're not learning other languages?
Well, I think Benjamin's expressed it beautifully. It's the richness and diversity of our languages and cultures, and seeing the world through different eyes. And I think it would be a terrible shame to lose that. And we have over 7,000 languages in the world at the moment, but a number of them are endangered, and people aren't worried about that in the way that they should be, I think. People worry rightly about losing animal species. We're losing languages, we're losing cultures, and we need to value and cherish them. And that's the point I always try to make when I'm talking to government. It's not simply about the words on the page. It's about that rich cultural understanding that comes when you really know a language well.
Now, final question, putting you on the spot. What's your favourite word, but not in your native language?
Okay, well, mine changes every day. But because I'm a professor or an emeritus professor of French linguistics, I'm going to choose a French one, if that's okay. And I'm going to choose the word flâner, which means to wander aimlessly through a city. It's a word which was popularised, I suppose, in the 19th century by writers like Balzac and Baudelaire, and it has this idea of wandering leisurely through the streets of Paris without going anywhere, simply for the pleasure of soaking up the beauty of the city. And we had a flat for 10 years in Paris, and that verb and the associated noun flâneur conjures up for me images of Sunday afternoons in Paris, just walking through the city, enjoying its delights, enjoying its architecture, enjoying its parks, and really just feeling great.
Benjamin, beat that.
That's a great word. I didn't know that word, but I'm gonna. I do. I think I have flâned, but I didn't know what I was doing at the time. My word, it is hard to choose. There are many words.
It's like choosing a favourite child, isn't it?
It's like choosing. Well, right now that's an easy choice for me, actually. But Yeah, I'll choose a word in Spanish. As I said, my wife is a Spanish speaker, native. There's my boy crying right now. Maybe you can hear him. I'll choose sobremesa, which is a Spanish word that is, I think, sort of like flané. Is it flané? Do I have that right? Yeah. Is just very culture specific, right? So one thing that is very common, if you've ever spent time in Spain, is after the meal, you sit around at the table and chat. It's like sometimes for hours. I think typically for hours, actually. And this is something that I've learned with my in-laws, and it's delightful. Whereas Americans might get up from the table and pay the bill, Spaniards stick around. It's like just when the food is ended, like the sort of event has just begun. And that period after the meal of just sitting around and schmoozing is called sobremesa, which is literally like over the table. So I like that word because its existence tells you something about this culture and sort of what's important, and it's an idea that it's something that you can do anywhere, but it's something that sort of an idea that has been crystallized by this one culture.
Well, it's a lovely way to finish, and it's conjuring up images of Spanish holidays now that I've been on and being in Spain. So thanks so much to Wendy Ayres-Bennett from Cambridge University and the Bennett Institute, and to Benjamin Pitt from the Institute for Advanced Study in Toulouse. Now, let us know what you think of this latest episode of Season 4 of Crossing Channels. If you enjoyed it, then do leave us a review. It helps us shape future episodes, and it helps people find us, so we do appreciate it. And do please listen to other Crossing Channels episodes, including our last one, where we discussed why do we choose what we choose. And please join us next month for the next edition, where we'll be talking about how immigration impacts and shapes the economy and society.